I put together this video to cover the most common basic jig types, what they're used for, and then some basic trailers for each to help you get started. First up is known as a structured jig. It's a basic all-purpose jig that can be cast, skipped, pitched, or flipped, and are super effective when dragged along sloping rocky banks, like what you find along bridges or dams, call it riprap, along points, which are those areas along the bank that kind of jut out into the lake, and pretty much anything you see in the water. Rocks, logs, weed lines. As our friend Debo would say,
find wood, pitch to wood.
The beauty of the jig is that it's compact enough that a bass can easily suck it up off the bottom. And more importantly, it needs to have a head design that allows it to bang and crawl over rocks without snagging. Some of the more recent structure style jigs are kind of shaped like a squished down football, or even have a head shape that's more like an arrowhead. These jigs are meant to be dragged along the bottom in short little tugs, or maybe a slight lift and drop technique to simulate a crawdad or crawfish, depending on where you live. Now the weight selection for these, I run between 3/16 up to a half an ounce. Now one of the things I like to do when I first get one of these jigs out of the package is I will actually get a pair of scissors and trim the skirt right below the bend of the hook. And I'll kind of do it in a little, circle that kind of follows the hook. Kind of helps the skirt flare out a little more. But when they sell you these, they leave the full skirt so you can adjust it based on what you want to do. Now when I was talking earlier about the Arky style jig shape head, I'm talking about this one here, that it's kind of flat, as you can see here on the head. And that's just based on a company named Arky who claim that they are the original bass jig maker out of Springsdale, Arkansas. One of my favorite structure jigs is the Juicy jig made by the Guggen Squad. Another favorite is the good old Denny Brower structure jig. Find it in any Walmart. And 6 Cents actually makes a hybrid. It's kind of a combination of this style and a few others we'll talk about in a minute, but it's got that basic flat shape, which is really good for skipping under docks, under overhangs, things like that. And some of my favorite trailers for these jigs would include the Berkeley Power Bait Chigger Crawl, the Guggen Squad Bandito Bug, the Zoom Super Chunk. Next up, we're going to talk about flipping jigs, like the Strike King Denny Brower Pro Model jigs that you can find in pretty much any Walmart. Flipping jigs are designed to go into the heaviest wood or brush and come out unscathed. Well, at least that's what they tell you. Flipping jigs range a little heavier than our casting jigs, from 3/8 up to an ounce, but they feature a stout, heavy gauge hook. It's really meant to horse those fish out of the deep cover stuff. The ideal head shape will be something compact, preferably with a recessed line tie, and the weed guard's a little bit stiffer than other jig types to prevent it from getting hung up in branches and other obstacles. Rattles are also a big benefit when flipping a jig, and the best models feature an integrated rattle. So to compare these side by side, you can see our previous casting jig with the structure jig. Obviously, this one has got a lot heavier gauge hook. It's got a much thicker weed guard. But here on the bottom, you can also see the built-in rattle chamber. Now, some of the jigs will have these little rattle tubes that are actually connected to the collar where the skirt's tied on, such as this one from Dirty Jigs. And more recently, we've seen jigs like this one from Trashmaster Lures, designed by Steve Parks, the guy who invented the Rage Tail and all of that. He came out with a new lure that's meant to be fished that's weedless. It features a heavy wire gauge hook, but it has a screw lock there on the back of its head that you can take and feed a soft plastic on, and then you rig it Texas rig to make it weedless. And that lets you throw this jig head into the deepest, heaviest, nastiest cover, and all but eliminating your chances of getting hung up when throwing this into deep stuff. And I've actually fished this quite a bit and need to get a bunch more. This thing actually works really, really well. So real quick, let me stop and talk about flipping for a second, because with this technique, it's mostly pitching and some flipping, but a lot of people get the two confused. Pitching is when you basically take and do an underhand cast to an object. You're pitching it to that piece of cover, either a lay down, a stump, things like that. Flipping is when the jig is in the water, and pick the jig up out of the water by taking and pulling the line with your thumb and bringing the jig back to you, and you're underhand rolling it back out to the object and then letting that line come back into the rod. You're not doing any reeling. You're basically throwing it out there at a short distance. You're picking that line up with your finger and you're bringing it back out and dropping it in the water quietly. That's the difference between pitching and flipping. So some of my favorite jigs for this technique: the Dirty Jigs flipping jig, the Strike King Pro models, and this Trashmaster jig that you can find at shopcarls.com. As you can see here with my Strike King Pro model flipping jigs, what I throw into heavier cover, big thick hook, much heavier weed guard. I use the Strike King Rage Tail bugs, and the Pro model kit actually comes with 2 of these Strike King Rage crawls. Very nice. Now, why do I love the bug style baits? Well, when I feed this onto a jig, and you can see I've used this one before, but when I get it fed onto this jig, it creates a nice flat bottom between this rattle and this bait. So if I'm coming over a limb, it won't tend to roll over. So even the rattle's flat and the bait itself is flat. It'll keep it from rolling over on a limb and getting stuck. That's why I like these type of bait. But if you're working around the outside of trees and kind of brush, these crawls are really good too. So I will tend to work outside and then start throwing in, especially if you get around a beaver hut where there's a lot of brush in the water. Now, one of my other favorite jigs to throw around wood are these 6 cents Divine hybrid jigs with these stroker crawls, because these stroker crawls are cut a little bit different. It's more of a speedworm style crawl, so that when this is falling, this hook grabs the water and gives it a unique kick. But I really like the 6 cents soft plastics here. They do a good job of, you know, blue on one side, green on the other. So if your situations change, you flip it over. This one on a clear stain side. I mean, look at the shirts on that. Just by turning it over, you get a completely different presentation. My favorite jig for throwing in all the nastiest stuff is this Trashmaster jig. You Texas rig the hook so that it's weedless coming through. I love this with the chigger crawl. I've got these candy colored chigger crawls. I've got black and blue. I need to order some more black and blue heads, but this is an absolute beast. You can just jig this up and down in branches and whatnot and really get in the thick nasty stuff, and it just will not get hung up. Great little jig. And again, this is made by Steve Parks, the guy who invented all the Rage Tail stuff. Meant for dragging along rocky bottoms, a football jig's pigskin shaped head allows it to roll over rocks and rubble without falling into the cracks. The most common way to fish a football jig is to make long bombing casts towards deep water areas like rocks, humps, and ledges. Then you pull it along a bit, reel up the slack, and do it again, kind of just dragging it along. This is a great way to feel the bottom and get an idea of what's down below. You can also stroke it up and down from the bottom. And what I mean is rip it off the bottom and let it fall back down. Those bass will hit that on the fall. Now, the ideal weight for football jigs, well, they can range from 3/8 ounce all the way up to an ounce. And this one isn't even an ounce. This is 3/4 ounce. But look at the side-by-side comparison to the size of the heads on each of these football jigs. Just depends on how deep of water you're fishing. You got to kind of try it out. But it also may depend on how deep of the water is that you're fishing. Super long cast, get out there with this 3/4 ounce football head. Or if you're just making shorter casts, maybe even in colder water, you got this super light wire football head. This small lightweight one would be good for cold, clear water where you have to make a long cast and be very subtle when bringing it back. But this is a finesse style bait, which we'll get into in a minute. Now, when I'm generally throwing football heads, I'm going to stick with something like this Jewel Baits heavy cover football jig. It's about 5/8 ounce. As you can see, the football shape style there. Nice, stout but not overbearing weed guard, and regular style light wire hook. You don't need something super heavy when it comes to the wire because you're not fishing around cover. You're throwing it out and dragging it along rocks, those sandy bottoms, things like that. Now with football heads, I'm truly mimicking a crawfish, so I'm gonna throw out something like that Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver, that Yamamoto Double Tail Grub, a Strike King Rage Crawl, a Guggen Squad Kraken Crawl, things like that. Crawfish imitating bait. Guggen Baits Trench Hog, the X Zone Adrenaline Crawl, and the Reaction Innovations Kinky Beaver. Great for dragging along the bottom. Now next up we're going to talk about finesse jigs, which for me work especially well in 3 different type scenario. Places with heavy fishing pressure, super clear water, and cold water. These are normally super small jigs with light wire hooks and very light weed guards, some with a traditional skirt and some with this spider type cut skirt. Some with the Arky style head like we see on this Guggen Squad Lil Juicy, and some with a round head like we see on this 6 cents Divine Finesse jig. Now like I said, most have ball shaped or compact heads and can be deadly when you pair them them with really small crawl or creature style bait. The miniature profile helps anglers trick wary or sluggish bass into biting when they may be hesitant to gobble up larger style baits that they've seen all season long. Anglers fishing in cold water depend on finesse jigs when slowly dragging, twitching, or barely scooting across the bottom of your winter fishing hole with just enough movement to hope to grab the attention of a wintertime bass. Finesse jigs do well in super clear water where bass actually have a chance to take a look at the lure. Now, tungsten is a good choice here for finesse jigs because you can get a pretty decently heavy sized bait if you want to drag it along the bottom in a very small profile. I don't have any in here with me right now, but I've had good success throwing the Monster Bass tungsten jig that looks like this. Alright, we're going to throw this new Monster Bass jig. It's a tungsten hand-tied little football jig. There's a whole lot of nothing under those trees, but they could be cruising those banks looking for the cicadas falling in. Yep, that's exactly what he was doing. Now, sometimes one of the things that makes a difference, especially in clear water, is the round living rubber skirt, because they tend to flare and pulsate in the water even when the jig isn't moving. Now, some of my favorite finesse jigs, the Strike King Bitsy Bug, the Guggen Squad Little Juicy, the 6 Sense Divine finesse jig, or even these super inexpensive Arkies that you can find at Walmart. Some of my favorite trailers, X-Zone Muscleback, Guggen Squad Little Crack and Crawl, Tiny 6 Cent Stroker Crawl, Z-Man TRD Crawls, all good options. Now, the swim jig is a really fun one because it's literally just cast and retrieve. This is a Strike King swim jig, and as you can see, it's got a vertical line tie, so it makes it nice and easy to throw out there. They also make specific grass jigs, but I just use swim jigs. They're very similar in design. They both have a pointed head, vertical line ties, makes it easy to pull everything back through. It's got kind of a light, weed guard here, and a pretty decent hook, and a bait keeper. My absolute favorite are these Divine swim jigs because they are gorgeous. This one looks like a shad. This one mimics a bluegill so well it's not funny. But you just take these and throw your favorite swim baits on the back and boom, swim jig glory. It's a great way to fish realistically year round. Now, the swim jig is designed to come through grass and wood, and we'll get bites in open water as well. You don't drag it, you swim it. A lot of people throw it out and just retrieve it straight back, but one of my favorite techniques is to give it a pop on the way back, really get that skirt flaring. It can be fished at the surface, it can be fished down just off the bottom, and anywhere in between. In true swim jig fashion, it truly covers the water column from bottom to top. These range in size from 3/16 to ½ an ounce. That's what I normally stick with. You want to use the wider silver colors when you're imitating shad, if that's what's swimming around in your bodies of water, or go with the ones in colors of green, brown, purple, and orange when imitating bluegills. Now, what trailers do I like with these? You got the Strike King Rage Swimmer. You got these Guggen Squad Saucy Swimmers. Some of my favorites are the Divine swim baits. Various shad patterns. You can see my swim jigs over here from 6 Sense, kind of a bluegill pattern. And look at the detail in that when you're trying to mimic a bluegill. But look at this pair up. Gorgeous bluegill imitation swim bait from 6 Sense. All right, real quick, let's talk line, reels, and rod. The vast majority of the time, I'm fishing more open water. I'm pitching under laydowns. I'm pitching next to logs. I'm pitching next to, rocks, things like that. The vast majority of the time, anytime I'm going to be pitching or casting a jig, it's going to be on 15-pound Seagar Invisix fluorocarbon. Now, I do keep a flipping stick, heavier cover, thicker, nastier stuff. 17-pound Seagar Abrasive, got more abrasion resistance. Not really meant to be cast really super far. This is when I'm like throwing into brush piles. I'm picking apart a tree that fell into the water last year, and I'm throwing in and around amongst a bunch of branches. I really want that flipping jig to be able to get in and out of there and not get damaged. I just don't use braid for a whole lot of things. If I'm going to be throwing a jig around lily pads, I'll pull out my frog rod, which has 60-pound braid on it, and I'll tie a jig on that. The vast majority of the times, since I fish out of a kayak or my boat, I'm picking around laydowns and things like that. I'm starting on the outside and working my way in. If you're a bank angler, you're making long bombing casts, either along a bank into something that's laying next to water, and that's where the Invisix works really well. It's really the do-all-purpose, every kind of fluorocarbon, in my opinion. Rods and reels. With every new angler, especially bank fishermen, you're probably starting out with spinning rod. No big deal. If you look around in your local sporting goods shops, you'll find spinning rods like this old Shimano jig and worm rod that I've had for probably more than 10 years. And I have fished jigs and worms with this out of my kayak back when I was using a paddle kayak. The majority of the time, I can tell you how many fish I've caught off of this throwing a jig or a Texas rig worm. It's just a 7'2" medium heavy extra fast action rod, but one that Shimano made, and I think I picked this up at a Walmart. Now, if you've been following along with the beginner bass fishing series and have gotten what I normally consider the go-to standard 7 foot to 7'2" or 3 medium heavy fast action bait casting rod like this Lew's Mock Crush, which I really like. Easy to learn with, adjustable brakes on the outside, good quality combination. I have the 15-pound Seaguar and Vizix on this, and I'll throw any of these jig combinations on this. Is it ideal for throwing in and around super heavy cover? No. But hey, a lot of the times you can still horse those fish out of the thick stuff. But with any of the others, swim jigs, casting jigs, finesse jigs. Alright, finesse jigs might be a little bit better off on a spinning combo like this Mock Crush. Now, if you're still playing budget friendly, the Shimano SLX paired up with an SLX medium heavy fast action rod, 7 foot to 7'2". Perfect combination to get you started with throwing a jig. Again, just like the other combos, same thing. 15-pound Seaguar and Vizix, good to go. Now, if you want to step your game up a little bit and you've already got a combination like this, but you want something specific for jigs, swap this out for the SLX MGL and go to a 7'4" or 7'5" heavy fast action rod for fishing around that heavier cover and going up to that 17-pound line. Now, if you've got a little bit more to spend and you're looking for something jig specific, that SLX MGL paired up with this Dobyns Champion XP 7 foot to 7'4" fast action rod makes for a beautiful combination. And you can see this, if you like matchy, this Dobyns Champion XP also has the blue accents that match up very well with this Shimano SLX MGL. But if you want a heavier flipping stick, they make a Champion XP for whatever you're looking for. Now, are you brand new to fishing or coming back to it after a long time away? Maybe looking for some tips, tricks, reviews, how-tos? If so, welcome to Fishing with Gramps, presented by American Legacy Fishing Company. We're a YouTube community built around sharing our passion for fishing while promoting youth and veteran recreational activity. It's absolutely free to click that subscribe button and bang that little bell icon so you get notified whenever I upload a new video. Feel free to join our community at any time. If you have any comments or questions, want anything further explained, drop them down in a comment below. I'll be sure to follow up, and I'm sure many of our community members will as well. We're all willing to help. Now, if you're interested in learning about chatterbaits next, check out this video right here. Or if you're brand new to fishing and you want to get started with our How to Fish playlist, hey, check this out. Until next time, get outside when you can. Make some memories, one cast at a time.